What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Research Radar. My name is Derek. If you don't know, I run peptideprice.store and Peptide Price, the school community. We're going to be hopping into everything that's actually happening in the research space. I'm committing to doing this podcast once a week, and it's primarily just going to be a self hosted podcast talking about all the updates. However, we will have guests and stuff like that on in the future. So, what's been happening with me? I started a different podcast. You guys know I've tried this twice. However, I have been traveling a little bit. I started out going to Dallas, Phoenix, then it was Tampa, then it was also Columbus for the Arnold Sports Festival, and then I was just in San Diego. So I was traveling, trying to find out where I'm going to move. I'm leaving Denver and finally decided on Tampa. There's a lot going on in Tampa, and I'm excited to finally get that Florida weather. As you can see, we're not as pasty as usual. We've got that nice golden tan, which will probably go away because we're in beautiful Colorado where there's sun. However, it only comes out for a little while and it's cloudy most of the time, especially right now. That's what's been going on with me, and that's why I've been slacking. However, like I said, I'm committed to doing this once a week. So let's talk about some of the stuff that's been going on in the research space. Basically, the last 2 months have been payment processing hell. If you have tried to place an order with a research company and something got declined, probably not your fault. There has been a 50 to 60% acceptance rate on the good end for some of these payment processors. What does that mean? You try to put in a payment, your credit card doesn't decline. The one on the other side, the actual payment processor, is declining your transaction. So typically, it's one or the other. It's either Visa or MasterCard. If you're trying to pay with a Visa card, maybe try with a MasterCard. That might get accepted, but it's been a mess the last, 2 months, like I said. From the research company side of it, it's been even worse. They have to do all these extensive payment processor applications, and what that means is they will, go through all the financials, do all this stuff, meet all this compliance terms, and they add a new processor in. They promise them the world of this is going to be the best processing. You won't have to worry about anything. You'll be good to go. And then the processing gets shut down 5 days later. Either they hit a cap where they can't do more than X number of revenue, or they literally pull the plug on the research company, hold all their funds, and never pay them out. Imagine you're running a business, right? You do 100K in sales, right? All of that you have to take into account margin for, you know, how much is actually going out. You have to buy those samples, you have to send it out for testing, you have to pay your employees, etc. And then you have this payment processor that comes in for the very last step to actually process credit cards. They're holding all your money. So that's something to account for. A lot of these guys on TikTok, these gurus in general, say you can start a peptide company with 8K or 10K. Like I've seen some of these companies have over $1 million held in reserves from these payment processors. It's a crazy space to be a part of, and everybody asks me, "Oh, why don't you start your own research company?" It's a pain. It's a lot to deal with in general, not only on the customer side of things, but then you have payment processors trying to screw you over. It's a lot and it's a headache. So if you've seen different solutions pop up or your card get declined, like I said, that's probably not your fault. The craziest thing I saw, one company was doing 7 different processors. They tried out all seven of them took them down and held their money. There's only been a couple companies that feel semi-confident in their solution. However, this payment processing was rolling for 6 months, and then one company shut basically 80% of all peptide companies down in one day. So that can change overnight. That's why you've been seeing the Zelle and ACH options become more popular. I'm surprised more crypto isn't being used. However, not many people are comfortable with crypto in general. Everybody wants to pay with a card, but that comes with hefty processing fees and a lot of risk for the research company. So that's the whole recap there. Just like I said, be patient with these payment processors. They want to accept cards and they're doing everything they can, but it's not easy whatsoever. On top of that, we added a bunch of new peptide companies to the price tool. If you missed it, I think it was Peptology, some other ones. A bunch of them popped up. Since I recorded the last one, there's probably been like 10. However, we're pushing a new standard of testing. If you remember 6 months ago, it was uncommon for a company to test anything at all. Net content, net purity identification, that's all you were really getting. Now, this next most popular thing has become endotoxins. So a lot of companies are adding endotoxins in, and then we're seeing a shift now towards testing everything. So on the price tool, my price tool, peptideprice.store, now you have 7 different categories. You have identification, net content, net purity, sterility, endotoxins, heavy metals, and conformity. Let me break down what all those mean really quick if you're new to this whole space. Basically, A company will get a bunch of different research samples in. Let's just say it's supposed to be 10 milligrams of MOTS-C. Once they get that batch in, let's say the batch is 10,000 vials, right? They are going to take a sample and they're going to send it out to a third-party testing lab. However, to do all this extensive testing, they need a total of 6 samples to cover everything. That means one sample is going to be used for endotoxins, one's going to be used for heavy metals, one's going to be used for sterility, and then the other 3 samples are going to be used for conformity, which basically means net content, net purity, and identification. Identification, pretty simple, it's in the name. That's going to make sure that peptide is what it says it is. If that's supposed to be MOTS-C, it's going to get identified as MOTS-C. They basically run a blind test on it. Then the net content, how much of that peptide is actually present in that sample. And then net purity, what's the percentage that's actually pure MOTS-C versus things like fillers or preservatives, etc. So those are the first 3. They test 3 samples for that if they're running conformity. Then they move on to the next ones. The next one is endotoxins. That makes sure there's no dead bacteria in that sample. So that makes sure the first part of the testing process is completely clean. And I actually have a graphic to show you guys just that. And if you're watching on video, that's the pass test. So that's endotoxins or USP 85. This basically tests that the entire manufacturing chain from the raw powder to lyophilizing the product where it currently is, there's no dead bacteria. There was never any bacteria present. It hasn't died off, and that's clean up until that point. The next stage, this is where we test for net purity, identity, and content. This is going to test the active state. How much of the peptide is pure, what is it, and how much is in there. It's testing where it is currently. The next test, the future test, which is sterility, is going to test, will any bacteria grow over time? If something was contaminated during that process, it doesn't have any dead bacteria, but it could have certain things present that'll grow bacteria over time. This is where I want to make the distinction. There's 2 types of sterility testing, and there's more than that, but we're going to go with the standard 2 that are USP 61, as you can see on the screen right here. This is bioburden testing. Bioburden testing is a sped up sterility process. So this tests the first 5 to 7 days of the sample being reconstituted if any bacteria is going to grow over time. Then there's another one that is recommended for injectable form. This is a full 14-day sterility test. What does that mean? They reconstitute the sample, they leave it in under a hooded environment for 14 days, and at the end they check if any bacteria has grown. This is going to be a pass-fail for both of these. So some companies opt not to do the USP 71 sterility testing. I've heard issues on the legal side with this one. Also, it takes a little bit longer. It takes 14 days versus 5 to 7 days. So that's a big distinction. So if you see bioburdens on a COA, that just means it's a USP 61 and it's a little bit sped up for testing. So either one, basically, you can kind of make that choice if USP 61 is good enough for you for your sterility test or USP 71 is the right call. However, I will say now that companies have started testing for sterility, I've been getting reports back about 10% of batches that are failing sterility testing, meaning that when they're kept in a 14-day environment, they are going to fail some type of sterility test. This is typically the same as bioburden. These aren't, one of one. Basically, if it's going to fail bioburdens, it's also going to fail sterility. However, it could fail in that window after the 5 to 7 days as well. So that's why 71 is always preferred, the actual 14-day test. The last test I didn't talk about here is heavy metal testing. That's basically just testing if trace heavy metals are present within the sample. There's going to be heavy metals in everything. However, there's a certain acceptable range. Let me see if I can find that COA. I did find one. Here's one from Peptology. You can see basically none of these showed up positive for heavy metals. That's what those little boxes here that say lead, mercury, arsenic, etc. They test for these heavy metals and make sure they're not present within the sample. So that's the 7 out of 7 testing you're going to see on the price tool. That's the main thing to look at. Determine which tests are most important to you. There are some companies covering all 7 out of 7, or you'll see 6.5 if it's bioburdens. And just make sure the price point makes sense for you and that testing makes sense for your research. You guys should expect to see more and more of that testing pop up as new labs have entered the space. Just to give you some idea of new ones that I've seen popping up, AFI has been used by a lot of different companies. Covera is now here too that tests everything. And then there's a couple other ones that are just, popping up, and we'll see which ones turn out to be reputable and which ones can do all the testing. With that, there's been coming a lot of new products such as nasal sprays, capsules. I'm very excited because new testing standards have come out for those, and some of the best testing I've ever seen on nasal spray products and capsule products. If we look at this, this is Flawless and Glow. I believe they were the first ones to use this lab, Ethos Analytics. But you can see here, they're actually testing for the net content per spray of the bottle. So right here, they have a 50 milligram sample of Semax, which is another thing. These new products are, you know, much higher milligram amounts of Semax, so you have to do less sprays overall. This is 50 milligrams per bottle, 200 sprays. So I think that works out to 200 micrograms per spray. And boom, you can see right here, 52.17 milligrams per bottle. So that's really cool testing I've never seen before. It also tests it for USP 85, that endotoxins test. So now we get net, content per bottle of the nasal spray. And I think there's purity in here too. Yes, it's above 98%. And then the next one, you have capsule net content. So this right here was a cool one that I pulled up. This, I believe, is the Glow capsule blend. So this is GHKCU, BPC, and TB500. This shows you milligram per capsule. So it's supposed to be a 2 milligram, 0.5 milligram, 0.5 milligram blend, and it comes out to 2.09 milligram, 0.51 milligram, and 0.52 milligram capsule. I really like this testing because it shows a new level that we can actually confirm that the amounts and quantities are correct on these capsules, and they're actually being tested for purity and endotoxins as well. So huge shout out to Flawless and Glow for finding that lab. Like I said, that's a new level of testing that I'd like to see. It's not just a trust me situation. I know 6 months ago you couldn't even find a COA on a lot of capsule products. Nevertheless, an actual net content amount. And then on top of that, nasal sprays, good luck if you could find a test for any of those. I've been referring everybody who's been asking nasal spray wise to those labs because I like to see the net milligram amount per bottle. It just makes sense. You want everything tested to the highest standard possible. So that's pretty much all the updates going on. I'm going to hop into some of your guys' questions from the school community and we can kind of base it off there. This will probably be shorter podcast episodes based on what's happened the last week or so. And then when we have guests, we'll go a little bit longer. Without naming the company, what is the biggest debacle of a peptide company you've come across? A lot of you guys have probably remembered during the start of this whole community, we had a company started with P. They are no longer in business. They were basically doing pre-orders. So they were operating like a gray market, not an actual US research companies. They didn't have COAs for anything. They were taking everybody's money. They were, you know, building it all up, doing a huge group buy, and then it was coming back. Then they would test the product. However, when this all fell apart, everything got delayed, labs got delayed. It's basically you're waiting 6 to 8 weeks for test results. People are wondering where their products were, and they sent out products without testing anything. They put a batch number on that, they put a QR code, and they tried to link it back to an old COA. People were smart, and I got a message immediately when they started sending out products, and you should see there was probably 300 orders backed up, and somebody got a product with the wrong batch number. It wasn't tested, different cap color, and the product was never tested. It was sent out to Chromate. It was sent out to some other companies too. It was still pending testing. So what I did is we gathered up a bunch of samples that got sent out because these were all kits, and we sent them out to Freedom Diagnostics. Luckily, everything came back okay. But after that whole thing, everyone lost trust. A bunch of people started charging back, and that company went underwater pretty quickly. That was a nightmare, and it honestly taught me a lot about the research space, how I vet companies, how I, make sure their processes are in place, that nothing gets listed without a COA. A lot of times companies will either forget to upload the COA, but that COA needs to be done. If I ever catch a company that they sell a product and they don't have a certificate of analysis that has already been tested before they started selling it, that's a big issue and they would be removed immediately. Here's another good one from Obi. Do you think the research space is going to get harder and harder to access with big P involvement and EL pressure? Could be an interesting topic to discuss. Yeah, I think in general, as the popularity grows, more and more people are going to try to control the peptide side of things. In general, everything's going to get harder to access. We've already seen it with credit card processors. They're pretty much the biggest regulatory body that we have in the research space. They are what kills off access, and we've already seen that. So I think it'll only continue to get harder. People typically just find a way regardless. So I never think it's going to go away completely. Like I said, it could get pushed more underground with everything, and US research companies may not be a thing one day. However, when there's so much demand, there's going to be supply somewhere, especially when, insurance and other things like are very hard to get access to. It'll never go away forever. Jolene asks, your personal favorite stacks and which peps you personally wouldn't use. Well, one of them that I wouldn't use right off the bat is melanotan. I have a history of skin cancer in my family, so just the way that modulates melanocortin and all those other things, if you have any skin cancer in your family, stay away from that one, especially just, the tan is not worth it in my opinion. Melanotan's one I would not use. There's some other ones like IGF-1, LR3, just elevating IGF-1 for those prolonged periods isn't worth it in my opinion. And a lot of times, if something works by people who've already researched with it. You can point to the bodybuilding community for this. If they know something works, they're going to be using it. And none of them are really using IGF-1 LR3, so it can't be that great for muscle growth. Will it help incrementally? Sure, but I don't see, you know, the benefit risk analysis just isn't there for me. We'll go over some of the personal favorite stacks too. I'll give you three different ones for three different use cases. First one, we'll go with the sleep stack. If you don't know, I put this out a while ago on the school community. I believe it was something like Selink, which is great to kind of wind down right before bedtime and really get into that relaxed state. That's the one that's helped, put me to sleep the most. Then once you are asleep, I don't get a lot of deep sleep in general, so DSIP has been a big game changer there. Basically, if I can get to sleep and stay asleep, I can normally get an hour of deep sleep with DSIP. Without DSIP, I'm at like 25, 30 minutes and I just don't feel rested at all. So Selink, DSIP, and then I do like some of the melatonin blends. I believe Atomic has one called the Midnight Blend, and there's some other ones as well, but those just have things like magnesium, L-theanine, GABA, histidine, stuff like that. But you can get all those as over-the-counter capsule supplements, which I just do instead of that blend. So if you can get there with the capsules and over-the-counter supplements, Selink and DSIP are going to do wonders for that. And then on top of that stack, I'd throw epithalon twice a year. That just really helps reset circadian rhythm. So that's the sleep stack. Mitochondria stack I've talked about a bunch, but that's going to be SS31 to start out. That's going to help repair any mitochondrial leakage and protect the inner membrane of the mitochondria. Then you add in MOTS-C. That's going to send a stress signal to make your mitochondria work better and produce more mitochondria. After that, NAD plus is a good option to add in for an extra little energy boost. Then on top of that, you can add SLU. That's not one I add in every single time, so that's optional. And then another optional one on top of that is 5-amino-1-MQ. That's specifically when you stall in a fat loss phase. That can be great for overall energy, but like I said, I only reserve that for about 6 to 8 weeks when you stall in a fat loss phase. That's the mitochondria one. And then if I had to go with just a skin peptide stack, which not a lot of people talk about, GHKCU, KPV, and glutathione. That's all you need, and basically GHKCU is going to speed up collagen synthesis, hair regrowth, just quicker synthesis and skin remodeling there. The KPV is going to calm down localized inflammation. If you get a lot of acne breakouts or have any skin conditions, that's going to calm that down. And then glutathione, if you have, a lot of oxidative stress or don't have a lot of antioxidants, your skin's not going to look great. So adding in that glutathione can really do wonders there, and that's normally the missing key of the formula for people to get that really bright and glowy skin. So those are the top three I would go with for skin. That's my skin, mitochondria, and sleep stack. I can go more in depth, but those are the three that I keep coming back to. And then Manny asked for my top 10 stacks. I won't do the top 10, but I'll add one more in there. I will add a GLP-1, aka fat loss stack, for anyone interested, because that's how a lot of people enter the research space. GLP wise, I found the best is, Reta, aka GLP-3. That's going to be the biggest needle mover in terms of total weight loss. That allows you to still eat a good amount, however, still feel satiated. And I find with TERS, all my food noise goes away. With Retta, I have a little bit, but Retta still allows me to eat as much as possible. The one thing I'll say, if TERS is working, stay on TERS. If Retta is working, stay on Retta. Don't switch because you think one's better. So we're going to start with the GLP in that stack. Then I would add something like Tessa or CJC IPA. Tessa is great for visceral fat loss, but I've talked about this before. It's only been studied for visceral fat loss. CJC IPA hasn't, other GH secretagogues hasn't. So, those two can be interchangeable, Tessa or a CJC IPA blend. That'd be number two. And then to kind of speed up that process a little bit, you could add something like a mitochondrial pep in there. Something like MOTS-C is going to be the best bang for your buck, in my opinion. Add those three, you should be well on your way to whatever goal weight you're trying to get to. So that's the fat loss one, in my opinion. Love to hear more about blends and efficacy, says DS. So this is the one thing you guys need to know about blends. Blends, when they're lyophilized together, they're going to maintain their purity because they all kind of concentrate to one pH that's not going to get affected if you would blend them all together yourself. That pH is kind of stable in that lyophilized form. When you go and blend all of them yourself, that's when degradation issues can occur, and you can also have the peptide either gel up or go cloudy because you're mixing a bunch of different environments together. That's kind of done for you in that lyophilization process. So a pre-made blend like Glow or Clo, that's completely fine. You're going to get the benefits of the blend. So but honestly, the blends that make sense to me are something like BPC, TB500. If you're going to use those in a 1-to-1 ratio, then the Wolverine stack just makes sense. Things like Glow or Clo don't really make sense for injury recovery because you're not going to get enough BPC or TB500. For a skin blend, I prefer something like a GHKCU KPV. That makes a lot of sense to me. If you have specific blends you want me to go over, we can. The main thing is just look at the ratios, and if those ratios make sense and you're not going to have to titrate one up or down, that's when you go with the blend. This one from Dave is interesting. He said, something that I'm curious about is my first encounter with GLP-1s was from a compounding pharmacy. They compounded TERS with B12, and I noticed B12 back was available from Amazon. Is this something we can use for other compounds like BPC 157? I'm going to be honest with you. The reason B12 is blended with GLPs, B12 just gives you a little bit of an energy boost. A lot of the times they're just trying to blend these things together, and it's very common in compounding pharmacies, wellness clinics, med spas that they do this to try to get around the whole, same product as the GLPs being sold by the medical companies. So they just throw B12 in everything and they can call it something completely different and claim it's a different product. The B12 a lot of times is useless except for that little energy boost. If you need B12, supplement with B12, but backwater is all you need, and it's just an add-on that they can upcharge you for. Here's another thing I wanted to cover that was kind of asked about in the question section, but this whole category 2 to category 1, basically this would shift how many peptides could be offered by compounding pharmacies, wellness clinics, med spas, etc. So this whole thing, RFK Jr. went on a podcast with Joe Rogan and said that these 14 peptides, and I have the list right here, you guys can see BPC, TB500, CJC 1295, ipamorelin, AOD 9604, thymosin alpha 1, MK677, epithalon, GHKCU, melantan 2, Selenk, and some other ones as well. Basically, he said these would be coming back to compounding pharmacies. However, are they available at compounding pharmacies yet? No. All he said is that he's going to push that along in the approval process and start getting those on the FDA's radar to reevaluate if they should be offered by compounding pharmacies or not. We're looking at, with a regulatory process, anywhere from 6 to 12 months, maybe more than that. However, the government can push things ahead if they really want to prioritize those. This was back on February 27th. It's currently April 1st. Nothing has happened. Like I said, this is going to be a long process. If they push it forward, I could maybe see it happening in 3 months from when he announced that, but nothing's happening yet. And all this would do doesn't change the research side of things. It just makes them FDA approved, and then compounding pharmacies can prescribe them. So don't get your hopes up yet. Nothing has happened. Could they get it to happen? Sure. It's still well down the line though. So just kind of keep calm with those. Yes, it'd be better to access those through, compounding pharmacies if you wanted to. From the research side, it doesn't really change anything. So that's pretty much it for updates and questions. If you guys have more, make sure to drop them down below. I went over the main ones. Like I said, these will be shorter episodes focusing on the updates. And if we have a specific topic, I'm happy to go into that for longer. But just wanted to bring this to you weekly as a longer form content, explain, topics more in depth because those short 60-second videos don't do much. That's why I like to write in the post and go, a little bit more in depth. So hope you guys like it. Research Radar episode 1. Hope you guys enjoyed it and more to come. Love you guys.